In October 2012, Barrick Knitwear in Warwick in Scotland were going into receivership. They were going bust. And for over 25 years, they'd been supplying knitwear to Chanel. Chanel stepped in and they bought their factory and they underpinned those jobs. Is that a localised supply chain or is that a global supply chain? In essence, Chanel is now sourcing all of its cashmere jumpers for all of its customers around the world from Warwick in Scotland. They've put Scotland at the heart of the Chanel global supply chain. We might argue that it's a localised supply chain because it's in the UK, but really this begins to highlight one of the big issues we face in supply chain, that what's localised to one country is actually potentially a global solution for the world. So the changing landscape of localised manufacturing for many is seen as a technological thing. You know, it's something that's driven by technologies such as 3D printing. And I actually think we need to take a fundamental step back and look at what's changing in our business environment. And there's three things that's changing. The first thing that's changing really is what I would call right shoring. Right shoring is about making sure that we put our supply chain assets, that's really our factories, our warehouses, in the right places around the world. People have called this offshoring, they've called it reshoring, and they talk about moving things either from a more localised source, say from the UK to China, or when they talk about reshoring, moving it back from China to the UK. But actually, I'd argue that it's not about offshoring or reshoring, it's actually about right shoring and putting things in the right place. And that is driving a trend back towards localisation. Now, sometimes that doesn't mean to say that we localise all the way back to an individual country. Sometimes it may mean that we move more towards regional manufacturing. So Flextronics, they've totally redesigned their global supply chain looking at the total landed cost. That's the cost that it takes to manufacture, to move, to pay tax and other tariffs when you actually produce a product. And what they found was that the mobile phones and printers and other electrical devices that they made in China could be made for comparable prices, if not cheaper, actually for Europe in countries such as Ukraine or Hungary. However, when you then looked at the reduction in inventory holding costs, they were typically 60% less. And that massively reduced their supply chain risk. So it made a lot of sense for them to shift their manufacturing away from China, closer to where it's going to be supplied for in the European markets, to Hungary and to the Ukraine. But they weren't necessarily making, say, for instance, mobile phones in the UK for the UK. The second key trend is what I would say is mass personalisation. And this perhaps is the one that people really hook into when they're talking about the technology. 3D printing enables mass personalisation. It enables us to design something on CAD at home, to potentially download it through the internet to a range of different printers, whether they be in our own home or whether it be somewhere within my local vicinity or whether it be somewhere hundreds of miles away that can be then shipped back to us. But when we talk about mass personalisation, it doesn't just have to be printed, 3D printed. It could be made by a number of different manufacturing processes. But this shift towards personalisation means that we actually need greater responsiveness. And actually, it's very, very difficult to want a personalised product, send that image to China, you know, thousands of miles away, and then wait 6 weeks for it to be delivered. It's possible, but actually we probably want delivery within 1 or 2 days, particularly if we want that part for a present, or it's a spare part to mend something that's been broken, or just generally these days consumers are much more impatient and will want things a lot quicker. And this sort of technology, not just 3D printing, but actually making things more locally, can enable us in the future to have mass personalised products at mass customised prices. And then the third trend really is the whole issue around supply chain risk resilience and the idea that we might need some structural flexibility. And what do I mean by all of this? Supply chains, if most people think about them and if they read the newspaper, they tend to see supply chains being associated with bad things happening. People think about things like the Ramada Plaza incident in Bangladesh where the factory collapsed and killed thousands of people. And you know, is that really the price that we want to pay for the low-cost manufacture of our clothes? People might also think about things like the tsunami in Japan and what that did to Fukushima and the electricity supply in Japan, but then the knock-on effect that that had for things like the automotive industry, or the floods in Thailand that wiped out 60% of the world's hard drive production, you know, in a matter of minutes. These sorts of risks, that we call them network risks, and they account for over 70% of supply chain glitches or supply chain failures. One of the ways to mitigate against those risks is to make our supply chains more structurally flexible, meaning that we can shift the centre of gravity of the supply chain if one of these incidents happens. One of the ways that we can do that most effectively is to consider more localised solutions rather than globalised solutions.